for my first decade of training, I always thought that more strength meant more muscle growth. And although it did lead to a lot of results, I got way more results whenever I understood how muscle growth was actually triggered and what rep ranges are more effective if your goal is hypertrophy. So even though I've totaled over 1,800 pounds, 745 pound squat, 725 pound deadlift, 424 pound bench in powerlifting competitions at an elite level, the main driver of my muscle growth, both pre-PEDs and post-PEDs, came from the accessory work, as powerlifters tend to term it. But the difference between myself at the time and a lot of other powerlifters I was around, the ones that I was passing up, was because I took accessory work just as seriously as my main lifts. And that is where I grew the most. And it was through different styles of rep ranges than what most people, consider or even do in their own training, at least from what I tend to see, because I made these mistakes. So this video, I'm going over rep ranges, why they matter. And, the goal of this is not to argue what's the best rep range, or anything like that. This is just to give you information so that you can take it and make educated decisions on how you should structure your training if your goal is to, just be more aesthetic and build more muscle. So with all that being said, I'm assuming whenever I'm talking about this that your intensity is there and your technique is at least close to where it needs to be in order to actually stimulate muscle growth. So what is the goal with, reps? Right? The goal of reps are to hit a stimulus threshold. Muscles either are stimulated to grow or they're not in terms of growing muscle. So it's not to necessarily get stronger, but it is to, I guess you could say it's to get stronger, but more so as in adding more reps over time and increasing volume as your measurement for if you are progressing or not. So as a set approaches muscular failure, the faster twitch, larger and more growth prone muscles and motor units begin to activate more and generate a larger fraction or a larger amount of total tension. So, I'm sure you've heard there are, fast twitch fibers and slow twitch fibers. Well, there's technically two types of fast twitch fibers. There's, the fast twitch fibers that are more for power out, just raw power output. And that's typically what you see in, the 1 to 3 rep range, 1 to 3 to 4 rep range. And then there's kind of intermediate fibers is kind of a term that, and a nickname that a lot of people give them, but these are also known as type 2A. And these are just as important to train as your big fast twitch. In fact, you could argue that most people are probably going to have more of these types of fibers than, just pure, fast twitch in the 1 to 4 rep range. So you have to understand raw output is not the goal when we're talking about hypertrophy, raw power output. So that first set of fast twitch fibers, we can kind of keep them on the table, but for the sake of this argument, you kind of want to focus on the intermediate and, some slow twitch fibers, which I will kind of hit on a little bit. But why is all of this relevant? Muscles produce force. And in order to grow muscle, we're trying to produce force against resistance. And whenever we produce force against resistance, we get mechanical tension. And mechanical tension, as far as what the science says as of right now, is the primary driver of hypertrophy. Yes, there are other things that correlate, but this is one that is, consistently been shown to cause hypertrophy. So when we're thinking about mechanical tension, it's like, okay, well, why don't I just, get a maximum amount of mechanical tension on, 1, 2, and 3 reps? Why won't that rep range be as optimal for hypertrophy? Well, this is where you have to understand fatigue. There are two types of fatigue. You have peripheral fatigue and you have central fatigue. Peripheral fatigue is the fatigue that you experience as a set goes on. It's short term. It is basically the motor unit within a muscle itself, whereas central fatigue is essentially the connection from the brain to that motor unit. So when you do a lot more, 1, 2, 3, 4 reps, super heavy, you're causing more central fatigue. And whenever you cause more central fatigue, your body doesn't recover as well, which means you can't produce as much force on the next workout. And over time, basically your body's constantly playing catch up. And I experienced this powerlifting where, especially like as I got to the peak of a meet, like, you're supposed to peak a few weeks out, my body was done. I couldn't perform in the gym the same way that I could. And that's the goal of powerlifting. But when you do these lower reps, and for some people, it might even be 5 or 6 reps causing too much of that fatigue, your body gets so broken down that it can't, basically your brain is not connecting to the motor units in the same way. Therefore, you're not creating adequate mechanical tension in order to produce growth, at least growth in terms of what I'm assuming you're here for, which is to get yacked, be yak daddy. So in order to grow, we have to produce force under load in those fatiguing conditions. But the fatiguing condition we want to go for is that peripheral fatigue, not central fatigue, where it's your entire nervous system. So that fatigue is going to dictate how much more training you can do in the subsequent weeks and months. And that's why you want to try to stay at away from below 6 reps, generally speaking. And this is all general, a lot of it, you know yourself better than I know you. I know myself better than you know me. So the goal of whenever I'm going through this is to really highlight, how can you make a better educated decision? And I'll give some practical implications as well. So the science says 6 to 20 reps is most ideal. So the lower the reps you go, typically higher the weight, which means more systemic fatigue overall, which could mean less recovery, especially if you're somebody who maybe's taking time off from the gym and, you're just jumping right back in and you're automatically starting super high intensity, 6 to 8 reps on everything, where your body's not used to recovering in that manner. So either A, if you do want to go to the gym 5-6 days a week, you probably should heighten the reps, lower the weight, or B, you just take more rest days. Start at 2 to 3 days a week and you can slowly work up over time. So now when you're working in this, we'll just say 6 to 10 rep range, you are using typically more fast twitch fibers. However, it's important to know as you get higher, those fast twitch fibers switch on as you become more fatigued. Up until, once you hit about 20 to 30 reps, you're probably looking at more slow twitch fibers, which some people are more slow twitch dominant, which might indicate maybe you should do sets of 20 to 30 or do, drop sets. And a lot of people do this. I know a lot of people talk shit on drop sets. I love them. Great for pumps. I don't really see anything wrong. Are they optimal? Not necessarily, but something, if you enjoy doing it, that's going to be way more optimal than what science says anyway. And if you're getting results, then keep doing it. But in that 6 to 10 rep range, fatigue is typically higher, but it is a sweet spot because our fatigue, it won't necessarily get so high that you can't recover from it, at least over the course of a long enough period of time for you to get results. Now, you may need to deload if you're consistently sitting in that after, it could be 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, just kind of, that's a personal thing for you. But in general, 6 to 10 reps is still a good spot, but if recovery is something that maybe you struggle with, or you may want to possibly try to tap into some other, systems in your body or, I guess different fibers, muscle fibers, then maybe looking at 10 to 20 reps might be better. Now, for me personally, I typically see the most growth anywhere between, I'll say 9 to about 13, 14 reps, at least that, as I've been logging this last 4 or 5 months. I've kind of noticed most of my results from around that rep range, but occasionally I like to get a little nasty and I like to go up to 20 reps just to see what the hell my body can do. And so the benefits of doing, 10 to 20 reps, typically it's going to be more volume, which I know volume is, a lot of people say volume's a primary driver of hypertrophy, but it's complicated because how I see volume as just being a measurement of how much total work you're doing over time, which that in itself is good data to know that you are actually progressing. So for the sake of this, you're going to get more volume, less overall systemic fatigue, or at least central fatigue that we talked about, which could help you stay in the gym more. reduce injury risk, and improve recovery. Because with these weights, you're not necessarily gonna, it's really, from what my experience, it's a lot harder to get injured. And I'm not going to say I've tried, but it is a lot harder to get injured here. And typically, these weights are weights that you can focus on technique, and you can really focus on driving a maximum amount of tension, especially as you get tired throughout a set. You're going to be able to drive more growth in that area. However, if you want to go back down to 6 to 10 reps and, to work on technique, I understand, like, as you get up over, 12 reps especially, you're just kind of like, fuck, dude. Like, when's the second to end? Technique can break down. And at the end of the day, technique is going to be another way to progressively overload. So I always tell people, like, focus on technique, nail that. If your goal is hypertrophy, the weight on the bar doesn't matter. Leave your ego at the door. But with that being said, however, a lot of as you're in that 10 to 20 rep range, these muscle fibers, it's not super black and white. There's a mix of all of them. And everything I said about the muscle fibers, keep in mind, like, there's a mixture of them. They all kind of interlock like so. And, there's going to be a lot of variety. So I would even say, like, maybe have some of your exercises in the 6 to 10, others in the 10 to 20 rep range, and then work from there, because you're going to be able to hit a little bit of both. And all of these things are kind of on a continuum, because everybody also responds differently, genetically speaking. So it's important to understand there's always nuance to this. And so all of your muscles are going to grow. Some might grow more than others, and some rep ranges might give you more stimulus than others. So the goal with the reps, 6 to 10, 10 to 20, however you want to look at it, is to basically get more of these high threshold motor units, which is the ones that produce a lot of force, and it's to get them to work. Because if you do, let's just say you do 6 reps and you left, 7, 8, 9 reps left in the tank, you're not using that many high threshold motor units. But the closer you get to failure, the more you're recruiting, which means more mechanical tension, which means more of a growth response from your muscles. So, just from data, typically, just if you need more numbers, 30 to 85% of your 1 rep max is kind of that range. I personally like to sit anywhere between that 60 to 75 range. That's just my personal sweet spot. And also, after powerlifting at a high level for 4 years, I am so fucking tired of back squats. I can't do them anymore. They hurt. My knees, I've taken damage on them. I'm done with it. So 60 to 75% is kind of my sweet spot, but you could certainly go below that, do some drop sets, or just do like a hell of a lot of reps. I don't know who would want to do that. Maybe Satan, but that's just me. So as far as practical implications, so 6 to 10 rep range, it does make it easier to know you're providing some really good mechanical tension. Like, the weight's heavy enough, you're feeling it. It's very challenging. You may not have to focus on technique too much, even though I always advise to do it. But if you're the type of person that likes to go in the gym, throw some weights around, by all means, more power to you. Some strength development. So if you still want to get stronger, at least in some sense, this rep range is still going to lead to some strength development, not as much as you would if you were training for powerlifting, 3, 4, 5 reps, but you will get some of that. And they tend to be better for technique practice. So you'll be forced to lighten the weight where you can perform these sets properly. And for me, for a while, it was so much easier to gauge how close I was to failure in that 6 to 10 rep range. Whereas, what I've experienced from 10 to 20 is like, shit burns as you get up higher in reps. And a lot of times, like, I experienced this the other day, I was doing leg press, whereas the week before, I had marked myself at like 2 reps left in the tank with 11. And then the next week, the leg press was, it made my goal 12 reps at 1 RIR. I did it, and I ended up hitting 14, and that was my actual gauge. That was where my actual true 1 RIR was. So I think that, 10 to 20 can be hard to gauge reps in reserve, especially with the burning going on. especially if you're not used to those rep ranges. So 6 to 10 definitely has practical applications for as far as being able to gauge how close and how close you are in proximity to failure. And so the 10 to 20 rep range tends to have the best hypertrophic muscle growth response, but on average, just generally speaking. And it tends to be a better stimulus to fatigue ratio, meaning you're going to get a lot of stimulation, not as much fatigue that you can't recover from, and it's usually always going to be a safe bet as far as stimulating muscle. So if you're one of those people that's kind of on the fence, like, man, I don't know, I see all the stuff about, 6 to 10, but, I see all these other dudes that are jacked doing 10 to 20. 10 to 20 is always going to be safe. And so I usually will always say, if you haven't tried it, try it out. Especially if you're coming out of being focused more on strength and now you want to focus more on aesthetics. Try that. You're going to feel a lot better. Maybe not while you're working out, but the subsequent days, you're going to be able to recover more. You're going to be able to do more work over time. And at the end of the day, that is the goal of progression, is being able to do more work over a longer period of time. So another thing about the 10 to 20 rep range to consider is it's not necessarily the best as far as fatigue in the middle of your set. And that's understandable because it is very, very hard to do those sets. And that's probably why a lot of people don't want to necessarily go up that high. But if you can handle it, and if you build up your pain tolerance, you like I said, it's probably going to be better just generally overall. I'm not going to say it for sure is, because I'm not here to argue what's better or what's not, just to kind of give you more information. And my favorite part though about these sets is these rep ranges, 10 to 20, it forces you to level up your character. I mean, it forces you to go so deep into a pain cave that you are so uncomfortable. Yes, it grows you in the gym, but it also grows you and your mindset, because there's something to be said about doing that for a long enough period of time to where you learn how to dig deep, and you learn, what real pain is in the pain cave as far as the gym goes. So I always like to, as far as an example, I like to use the lateral raise. Some people like to perform them, 6 to 10 reps, and that's fine. Me personally, wrecks my shoulders if I do that. I also feel like I have a better connection and form to my muscle whenever I'm doing, that 10 to 20 reps. A lot of times for lateral raises, I like to go up between 13 and 15, 16 reps, just because I feel like I have a better connection and I'm not using so much traps. As you can see, can catch a bear with these, and I've used my traps for a very long time for a lot of things. And so for a lateral raise, I usually am going to do 10 to 20 reps just because a little bit easier on the joints. I can isolate the muscle more, and it's easier that way. Now, for any compound, whether it's machines, bench press, whatever, for any machine press I do, I typically will stay in that 8 to 12 range just because of technique. And eventually, as I start to get up near 10, I'm just like, bro, when is this shit going to be over? I'm done with it. So that is kind of my thinking behind it, why why these reps matter, why rep ranges matter, and why you should consider, if you haven't, doing higher reps, or if you haven't considered doing lower reps, try those out. But, doing higher reps, lower reps, either way, it's all about skill acquisition. And the better that you can get at these movements, the more you're going to be able to stimulate muscle. And the more you're going to be able to stimulate muscle, more results you get, happier you are, better self-esteem, et cetera, et cetera. And getting into a groove feels a lot easier in these rep ranges because you don't have all the neurological factors going on. You don't have that central fatigue. You don't, dread the fact that your joints hurt every time you lift. And it just makes it a lot easier. So with that being said, thank you. I am thinking about starting a newsletter soon, just giving some things I'm learning, tips I'm having. So if that does sound good to you, please leave a comment and just reinforce the fact that it is a good idea or that you would like it. And I will have some contact info in the description for you to reach out if you do have any other questions. I'm always happy to help. But other than that, until next time, peace.